Hello, you beautiful, wonderful people, you. Today, I'm bringing you one of the greatest decks in the history of Magic, Modern Jund. This is one of my all-time favorite decks. I got my first Grand Prix top 8 with this deck, and I actually got my first GP cash with a standard version of this deck. And with the recent changes in the modern banned list, I think that this is just one of the decks that you should be looking to. This has always been, in my opinion, the best deck. The Eldrazi deck was quite the problem, but for the most part, this deck is just so great. And Reduke even went like 8-2 at the last Pro Tour with Jund, despite there being Eldrazi all over the place. So this is just a phenomenal deck. For those of you who are unfamiliar with it and unfamiliar with my build, I typically always play something very, very close to this. I don't make a lot of changes depending on the metagame, and basically I like keeping it just very, very classic. I've never played Thragtusks. I generally think that 5-drops are unplayable, and there's a lot of other fancy stuff that people have tried that I was just never on board with. The one thing that is a little unique, and you could even say is a little greedy, is I have one Ghost Quarter in my deck, and I only have 3 Blackcleave Cliffs. So the reasoning on that is I just wanted to have this Ghost Quarter in, and it's basically a relic from when Amulet Bloom was legal, but it's just kind of, I put it in at that period of time, and it's just kind of stuck around because I've liked it. But the reason that I trimmed one of the Blackcleave Cliffs is I just didn't want to trim a creature land. I've got 3 Raging Ravine, and I don't want to go less than that. And by playing a full 10 fetch lands, I've got 4 Verdant Catacombs, 3 Wooded Foothills, and 3 Bloodstained Mires. It really increases the chances that I get to see all 3 colors of my mana. And if I'm going to be playing 10 fetch lands, I have to play enough fetchable resources. So after I came to those conclusions, the only thing that left that could be trimmed is these Blackcleave Cliffs, which are a great land. Drawing multiples of them is not actually that great, so 3 is even, in a way, kind of a nice number. But that's sort of the one unique thing. The one other thing that is, I guess, a little notable about me playing Jund is I love Olivia Voldaren. I like this card a lot more than most other Jund players, and there's been a lot of times where I've even played 2 in my main deck. So the one thing about Olivia Voldaren is, to note at least, is if you have Olivia Voldaren in your deck, you absolutely can't play 5-drops. I was saying how before I was kind of anti-5-drop. One of the big reasons is because I like playing Olivia so much. Olivia is an extremely mana-intensive card. If you curve Olivia into Thragtusk, that's actually not that good. You just played a Flying Hill Giant and a Thragtusk. You're much better off emptying your hand, having all of your stuff be cheaper, and having Olivia be the last thing you play with nothing else to follow up, so that you can just start machine gunning stuff down. And Olivia is just a 1-card win the game engine, essentially. It takes a little bit of time, and it takes a lot of mana, but you can beat anything. I have stolen opponents' Wormcoil engines. I have, single-handedly, won against decks like Pod, or Elves, or, Affinity, where they have this endless stream of creatures, and Olivia just shoots everything down. So if you get an Olivia to stick, it is just an insurmountable force. She's not that impactful the turn you play her, so generally speaking, you want a lot of cheaper spells, so that when you play Olivia, you can either be at parity or ahead on the board, and that typically informs a lot of the rest of my deck design, and is why I keep things, pretty classic without many of the fancy 3, 4, 5-drops that a lot of other people play. Huntmaster the Fels is kind of like an Olivia Voldaren. Well, Huntmaster and Pia, Kiran Nalaar, are kind of like an Olivia Voldaren light that are better when you're either behind or catching up on the board. Huntmaster and Pia have a lot more impact the turn they come into play, and they have a little bit of that machine gun component to them also. when I play Jund decks, one of the things that I try really hard to do is make it so that essentially every single card in my deck is a removal spell. Essentially, the one exception to that is Tarmogoyf and Scavenging Ooze, but Tarmogoyf is just so efficient; it like almost is like a Terminate in terms of its 2 mana board presence. And the Scavenging Ooze is just the thing that kind of rounds everything out. If I play against like a lot of the value decks have some sort of graveyard synergy, and you just want to round out your interaction so that it interacts with basically everything. I have hand disruption, I have removal, I can kill artifacts and enchantments, and I can interact with the graveyard. So, Liliana gives me the edict effect. So there's basically nothing that I can run into where I'm drawing dead. So to go to the sideboard, a lot of it is probably, again, just classic stuff that you'd expect. The one thing that's a little unique is this Kalitas. It's kind of a new addition that I'm trying out. The pod-style decks and some of the other decks are going to have a really hard time with this card, and it can be quite good. One other thing before we get to the games that I think is worth mentioning is if you look at my deck, a lot of times when you see me build a aggro deck, you'll see like 1 drops in a column, 2 drops in a column, 3 drops in another column, and the column after that I'll have all of my removal spells. And that's because the way that I essentially view the deck is I want to go 1 drop, 2 drop, 3 drop, and then start playing out my removal spells to clear blockers while my early creatures just swing. With Jund, it's a little different because I don't really care if I play my removal spells or my creatures first. With Jund, it's a lot more flexible. So, like, all you want to do is just trade, and you don't really care if you're trading creatures or removal spells. So that's why I have the deck kind of mapped out in this way. The other thing is that I have Scavenging Ooze in the 4-drop slot, and that's because Scavenging Ooze on turn 2 is just awful. It's kind of like a Den Protector in Standard, where you can play it on turn 2, but that's really not the reason you're playing it. Scavenging Ooze, if you're playing it on turn 4, and it's essentially reading 4 mana for a 4/4 that gains you 2 life and exiles 2 cards from your opponent's graveyard, that's like starting to become a reasonable Magic card to play in Modern. But 2 mana for a 2/2 is not really. So I have it slotted in a 4-drop slot, and that is also another reason why some people look at my Jund decks and say, wow, you're just not playing any of the big stuff. But I look at it and say, I'm playing 7 4-drops, which is a lot for a 24 land deck. The other thing about having a little bit of a lower curve is it makes your Lilianas a lot better, because you want to just play out your hand and then start discarding cards. So you've seen a lot of the times in my aggro decks I like having a lower curve because they're an aggro deck. But here in my Jund deck, I like having a lower curve because of the fact that Scavenging Ooze, Pia and Kiran Nalaar, and Olivia are such intensive mana sinks. And Dark Confidant is actually a bit of a mana sink too. And I've got these Raging Ravines. And Liliana wants my hand to be empty sooner rather than later. So here I'm again kind of playing a bit of a lower curve than some other people, but it's for different reasons. But basically, all in all, just casting spells early and often is just always going to be a good thing. So that basically covers the deck, and now we'll get into some games.